Like so many of the environmental issues that we've spoken about here at EnviroTube, managing bushfire risk is a shared responsibility. Council and other fire agencies play a role to mitigate part of the risk associated with fire, but the key players are residents and property owners. Living in Ku-ring-gai, we're so lucky to live around huge extents of bushland and national parks. It brings so much joy and reward to the people who do live here, and it also means that we have to prepare for some of the challenges and the hazards that it can present. We're going to talk with Mark, who's come all the way from Roma to help Ku-ring-gai to deal with some of our bushfire risk management. Mark, when we're talking about the risk of bushfire in Ku-ring-gai, how severe is it?
There's actually, since recorded records on the upper North Shore, which is virtually Ku-ring-gai area, there's been many severe wildfires.
Mark, in the bushfires that have been experienced in Ku-ring-gai in 1994, the risk sort of came from a few different areas.
Yes,
is that something we need to be prepared for?
Very much so. Seeing a lot of our fires now weather-driven rather than just fuel-driven, the weather in many cases in the big 94 fires came from the northwest, from Hornsby direction, and also up the Lame Cove Valley coming to the north into Ku-ring-gai.
So these
area.
Huge tracts of vegetation, which of course we love, but they allow fire to move across the landscape.
Yeah, that's right. A lot of these bigger fires are called landscape scale fires, so they'll move through the landscape and gain impetus, so to speak, as they travel.
And what are the factors that will drive a bushfire?
There's basically three factors. One is to have the fuel or the vegetation, and that's mainly the lower layers of vegetation, leaf litter, the mid-stratum as we call it. Then there's got to be sufficient dryness, or the weather dictates things. And the other thing, there's actually another two factors. There's slope. For every 10 degrees extra of slope a fire travels up, it gains double the intensity. And the other one is aspect. Often on the western side, if you live on a westerly aspect to your slope, your house might be up the top, you'll have a much more severe fire than if you lived with a south-facing slope, which is a lot moister. So again, that's weather dictating with topography, how fire behaviour will.
And when we talk about the dryness of the landscape, that could be on a vegetation, so whether it's a mesic environment or...
That's right. Or we, prior to the big fires last year, we had 2 to 3 years of drought. And drought and bad weather combined is the real factor to drive these big mega fires, if we call them that. In
a situation with a fire, we often obsess over weather and wind.
We do.
And how does that sort of impact on a day or on a bushfire?
On the catastrophic fire days, we see alerts come out from RFS, and that's really important not to be lighting fires, any type of fire on those days, and also to have a plan, a preparedness plan. What are you going to do on those days? Are you prepared to leave early before any sign of a fire comes? Is your exit totally free to get out? Many areas might have one way in, one way out roading, so it's really important to check that roading, because with smoke impacts that can make it much more difficult for motorists or walkers. You can prepare your house and your surrounding yard to a certain extent, but in a catastrophic fire which might travel through the canopy, really ember attack is a really big issue. And remember, 90% of all houses in Australia aren't lost to the heat up against the house, but they're lost due to ember attack.
There's been quite a lot of research about how far embers can travel from a fire front.
Yes, they've travelled up to 10 to 20 kilometres. For instance, in Brisbane, they've travelled right across Moreton Bay onto Bribie Island. Really, bushfire isn't just council's responsibility or the residents, it's a shared responsibility between residents and all the agencies.
So Mark, one of the key tools that council has to help with fire management is hazard reduction. And it looks like we've put a hazard reduction burn through this area quite recently.
Yes, about 2.5 years ago. This area was burnt with a low to moderate intensity and a very successful burn. If you looked at the ground stratum here, you can see many species coming back, whether they be grasses, forbs or herbs. It only takes about 2 to 2.5 years, given rain, for recovery to be very good. The only thing we have to watch with all that recovery, of course, it comes around to the next cycle when it may be burning again.
Of more fuel. And you can
That's
see
right.
how
you can see here
there is still a huge amount of fuel in these areas. We've probably reduced some of that connectivity and some of the ability for fire to spread quickly, but there's certainly still a lot of fuel.
There's still potential for a moderate wildfire. A lot of Australia's plants and animals have actually evolved over millions of years with fire. Even though Australia was a lot cooler in the past, there's been glacial episodes, fire has been a driving factor in both the eucalypts, the hundreds of species of eucalypts and wattles, and it's been a primary driver in their evolution throughout both eastern and arid Australia. So many species are there because of fire. So I suppose the big issue is we as humans, how do we now come to terms and live with fire?
So Mike, we've had a bit of a look at the bushland, and what's, I guess, unique and beautiful about Ku-ring-gai is the bushland very quickly transitions to that urban area.
That's right, extremely quickly. It's amazing. I'm constantly amazed every day by it.
So maybe you can take us to some of those places where we really get an example of that interface between the bushland and the urban residents and the built-up areas. So Mark, looking north here over this expansive,
bushland.
Wonderful, beautiful bushland.
It is beautiful.
And we turn around and it's right along the interface with these houses and these residents.
Oh, certainly. You can see how close. Of course, they have a sandstone shelf, which does help with protection from fire, because of course fire can't burn rock, but anything on the rock is flammable, of course. So, yeah.
There's obviously nothing that we could do in terms of mitigation works on such a steep slope.
The slope, yeah, that's the thing.
And the slope, like you were saying, has such an
impact
intensity
on
increase on fire.
Yeah, that's right, every 10 degrees.
What we're dealing with here is what we call an asset protection zone. This thin strip separating a huge expanse of bushland.
And it's only thin, isn't it? Really?
It really is.
What, 10 metres? And of course, with the asset protection zone, the main thing is to break up your fuel, and it's certainly looking good here. The only issue here, of course, you can see the ribbons up in the stringy bark up there, and of course they're highly flammable. If fire got to those, they'd take off into the air and become an ember.
And like we were saying, we've got a small strip of an asset protection zone which separates the bushland expanse from houses, and that really protects against some of that radiant heat.
This protects against the radiant heat. I think this house is in flame zone, but still, given this fairly broad expanse, it does stop that heat affecting the walls, the wall structure.
And I guess just what's so important is when we talk about the shared responsibility, we're talking about the responsibility in this strip may fall to council.
Yes, that's right.
But that's only playing a small part.
That's a small part, and you need all the parts to line up to align to have full protection.
Yeah. All around Australia, whether we're talking about coastal issues or we're talking about bushfire or we're talking about any of the natural hazards, flooding, there are planning legacies. These are houses that are built in areas which now, with our current planning laws, we wouldn't be building, or we'd be having an imposed protection area. So we're trying to protect a whole range of houses that exist, and where people live there and they enjoy their lives and their homes and their families. And we're also trying to deal with this increasing risk associated with climate change and urban densities. For people who do live next to the bush and are lucky enough to live next to the bush, what are the sorts of things that they can do, either retrofitting their homes or the actions that they can take to help reduce some of that bushfire risk?
Well, seeing most houses are really lost to embers, the thing is to guard against the embers. And one of your biggest things is your gutter, because embers will sit in the gutter, they'll wedge underneath the roof line. So a good gutter guard, not a plastic gutter guard, but a good metallic gutter guard will guard against
stop
embers.
That debris, stop the leaves from falling in.
Stop the debris coming in. It's got a function. It stops your leaves coming in and stops any embers which might lodge there. The other thing is exposed timber. Make sure if you have decking that it's kept well oiled and very good order, that it's not rotting with dry rot, because actually dry rot on any exposed timber, whether it be beams or whatever on a house, can catch alight fairly easily, either from embers or radiant heat.
When I'm looking over an area of bushland like this and trying to imagine what a fire in a place like this, perhaps it's a catastrophic fire day and something, and someone who's had a lot of experience, bushfire, what's it like?
Just terrifying really, Jacob. Even though you might prepare yourself mentally and physically for a fire, when flames leap up into the canopy and you get that heat on your face, it is truly terrifying, and it can move so rapidly. That's what people don't realise. If it's a wind-driven fire, just incredibly rapidly, and like if it's in the canopy, you don't want to be there, put it that way, because fireballs can form with eucalyptus oils. There's all these compounding issues up a slope. If you're at the top of the slope, please don't be there, because it is terrifying.
Ku-ring-gai Council is at the forefront of mapping and modelling these
Definitely.
kind of fires moving through the landscape, but it's really only able to give us an idea of how fast the fire could move. But
That's
to really
right.
experience it would be a completely different.
Because of course every fire behaves differently. There's no one single rule for a fire. Being prepared is so important. Planning and preparedness are so important. I know everyone talks about suppression, bringing out the firefighting vehicles, but they may not get to the back of your house. So you've got to be prepared and plan.
We've got the sim table here, which is something that Ku-ring-gai Council had pioneered. What is its role in helping the community to prepare?
So the sim table is some technology that we imported from the US, and what they use it for is for guiding firefighters in how to fight fires. So it shows you the landscape of a given area as though you're looking down from an aircraft, and you can see the fire move across the ground. It allows you to change the wind speed, the humidity, the temperature, so that you can look at all these different characteristics in the weather and how they affect fire behaviour. Also built into it are the vegetation layers for Ku-ring-gai, as well as the terrain and how the fire will behave in the different slope and aspect of this terrain. So when we run it, it allows people to see, oh, so this is what a really bad fire could look like in our area. And it really brings home to them just how fast and unpredictable a wildfire can be.
Now you've got to also realise that embers jump from ridgetop to ridgetop, so seeing we've got a series of ridges and gorges in Ku-ring-gai, we're most prone to that type of fire travel. And the sim table actually shows when embers jump and new fires starting.
The Australian landscape has evolved with fire, and it's something that humans living in this area are going to have to come to terms with. Prepare a plan so that you know what to do in case of emergency. And if you need help, visit the Council's website and look for the Climate Wise Community section.